Hey fearsome friends, and welcome or welcome back. Tonight's video is all about the unknown, the scariest thing of all. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. Exploring abandoned houses has always been a hobby that I share with my best friend Justin, and Oregon in particular is known for its abandoned towns. In 2018, we stumbled upon one such town that was filled with crumbling houses, churches, and various outbuildings. After looking into lots of windows and stepping inside some of the safer-looking structures, we decided to check out the biggest and creepiest of them all, and walking inside this place immediately unsettled us both. It was like walking into a scene from an apocalypse movie. There were several bunk beds, ripped mattresses, couches, soiled and forgotten toys, deteriorating child's books, and lots more was strewn all about in this one large disgusting room. An entire wall of small cribs were bolted in rows, and Justin and I both thought this was sad. A forgotten orphanage was similar to an animal pound. It was clear we hadn't been the first visitors since the original residents had up and left, as there was graffiti, broken bottles, and an old destroyed microwave. Thoroughly creeped out, we decided to head back to the car. When we weren't even 5 feet out of the door, there was a piercing noise coming from behind us, right in the middle of the orphanage room we had just left. I can only describe the noise as hundreds of rats screaming in a torturous pain. But weirdly, it was coming from the old destroyed microwave we'd spotted, and it was loud. My friend Justin is definitely the type who would die in a horror movie, because he immediately went back in to investigate. The ancient appliance was smashed open, bent, and almost undecipherable, including the power cord, which had been cut and ripped out. There was no reason, no sense or explanation in this blood-curdling noise coming from the microwave. Uncovering my ears, I was filled with a sense of intense fear. I begged him for us to get the hell out of there, so we hightailed it, both white as a sheet and shaking. It was only when we had put a few miles in between us and that dreadful place did we start laughing our asses off. Who the hell can say they've been haunted by a microwave? I laugh about it even now, but the pure terror and sense of dread I felt that day will always stick with me. Something was not right in that place. My boyfriend and I were long distance at the time, and he would regularly come up to see me. We'd stay in different hotels as I was still living with my family, and we wanted to be alone. Early last summer, we stayed at this particular pub hotel in England, when my boyfriend and I were having a bit of an argument in our room. Before it could escalate though, I went to go sit in the car for 5 minutes to defuse it. It was around 9 p.m. When I returned to the room about 5 minutes later, my boyfriend informed me that we were in trouble with the manager for being noisy. He told me that after I'd left the room, the manager had knocked on our door and told him off for making noise, saying that he had received 2 complaints. Before we checked out the next morning, I was looking out of our room window and saw a young couple leaving. I wondered if it had been them who had complained. We went out for breakfast, and thinking about it, things about the complaint just didn't add up to me. For one, we weren't that loud and hadn't been arguing for very long before I went out to the car. So how had 2 people managed to get annoyed, then go straight to the manager about it, all in the space of the 5 minutes it took me to walk to my car and back? I concluded to my boyfriend that the manager must have just heard us himself, then made up that 2 different guests had complained. Fast forward to the afternoon of that day when we went to check out, but unexpectedly needed to book another night due to the trains all being on strike. My boyfriend was travelling home by train, so while I was at work, my boyfriend went back to the pub and checked us in for another night, apologising for us being noisy the night before. The woman who he was booking with though said she didn't know anything about it, so he told her what had happened, But the woman member of staff said that it was odd because the only staff they have on at night is the chef and the young male bartender, and neither of them ever go upstairs. Plus their manager was a woman with blonde hair, not a man. The female member of staff said she doesn't know who this man was. None of the staff did, but that the other guests have also told her the same, that a man has knocked on their door complaining about the noise, saying that he's the manager. Well, the man my boyfriend had spoken to was in his 60s with gelled back salt and pepper hair, and he was really mean. My boyfriend recalled to me later that when he apologized to this man, he just glared at him and didn't make a move to leave. So my boyfriend just awkwardly shut the door on him. My boyfriend asked who else had stayed there, but was told that us and the other young couple I saw leaving were the only guests that previous night. This left us questioning who on earth the man was who'd knocked on our door pretending to be the manager. So that night we were feeling quite creeped out, and were in a different room that was opposite the one we were in the night before. Eventually we managed to forget about it and start enjoying our night, when suddenly there was a really hard knock on our door. My heart sank and I was telling my boyfriend not to answer, because I was sure it was the man again. But he of course answered anyway. The door was about 2 to 3 feet from the bed, but there was nobody there or in the corridor, which we were at the very end of. It was a long, straight, creaky corridor, and we were terrified now. The next day my boyfriend emailed the pub to tell them everything that had happened, and said we were concerned a weird stranger was knocking on doors in their hotel. We gave them the exact times of both incidents and asked them to check their CCTV cameras, one of which was right next to both of the rooms we'd stayed in. We got a reply that read this: "Following your recent complaint about another guest knocking at your door late at night, we reviewed our CCTV footage from the 8th of the 6th, 23 and 9th of the 6th, 23 at the stated times these incidents took place. On the 8th at exactly 21:05 p.m, CCTV footage showed a man knocking and having a brief conversation with the guest in the room, after which the man turned left and walked down the corridor. However, he was not picked up on any CCTV footage leaving the premises or walking further down the corridor. Following this, we have gone over security points of the building and made sure all entrances are secured to prevent anything like this from happening again. On the 9th of the 6th, 23, however, we did not pick up anything unusual happening on our cameras at the stated time of the incident. We hope these incidents didn't affect your stay, and we apologise profusely for any stress this may have caused. Just know we have taken all measures to resolve this." This email to us made us feel validated that we hadn't imagined it, especially to have it confirmed by the manager herself via CCTV. We did ask to see the CCTV ourselves, but our further emails were ignored, unfortunately. When I was around 21 years old, I divorced my son's father and moved back home. My son, who was around 15 months old, and I didn't have any space there, so I was looking to move out ASAP. My best friend's sister had just rented a house and was looking for a roommate. So long story short, we ended up moving in with her and her 5-year-old daughter. Everything was good at first, but then little things began happening, like the lights being on when I turned them off, or the washing machine lid being up and not washing clothes, even though I'd sworn I'd closed it and turned it on. One day when I'd gotten home from work, I noticed my roommate's prayer beads were weirdly in the mailbox. I asked her why she'd put them in there, but she said she hadn't, though maybe her daughter had somehow done it. Some time passed with these little odd occurrences continuing, when one night we decided we were going to go out. My son was with his dad and she called her cousin to come over and babysit her daughter. Our cousin arrived and we told him about all the strange things that had been going on. And as he was saying something about not being scared of any ghosts, a glass that was on a bookshelf flew across the room and hit him. We were freaking out. We were broke, young, single moms who didn't want to have to move back home. so we kind of just pushed it out of our minds. We actually decided to get 2 puppies for our kids, and I swear you'd think I was lying when I say that they never grew an inch whilst we were there. Then there would be magnets in the sink for no reason. Things started to escalate fast. One weekend, when the kids were at their father's houses, my roommate and I decided to clean the kids' playroom. However, the next morning it was a complete mess again. No one had been in there. By this point, I was too scared to even come home. One night I was in my bed, she was in hers, when we both heard knocking on the windows outside. We both had toxic exes and thought it might have been one of them, so we called the police. But when they came out, there was nothing, and they said it didn't even look like anyone had been there. We decided at that point it was time to move, and as much as I didn't want to, I had to move back home. The kids were now in physical danger. My roommate's daughter managed to cut herself on a mirror that had come from nowhere, and my son fell out of his chair and smashed his face up pretty badly. He began to get really bad nosebleeds for no reason, and whilst we were moving a huge mirror that was anchored to the wall, it fell and broke on my back. A lot of very strange things happened in that house, and the old man that lived across the street told us that no one ever lived there long. I, a 28-year-old male, and my fiancé, a 27-year-old female, like to go on ghost walks whenever we go on vacation. Most cities have them if you know where to look, and generally they're pretty cheesy. Some person drags you around, tells you the haunted history of the city, and tries to freak you out a bit. They tell you to take pictures and feel the energy, but it's generic and pretty funny. We like it for a laugh, and it's something fun to do. Boston, Salem, Savannah, Texas, New York. Seriously, we have been all over the US and it never gets old. We recently went to Key West and they have a huge haunted history and a lot of tours, so of course we did one. The tour started out as normal. Some 20-something girl taking us around with old-time makeup on and showed us the hot spots. Robert the Dollhouse, Graveyard Walk, a haunted bar, and my fiancé and I laughed the whole time. We were having a great time. The last place was the Pirate Museum, and when we stopped we were already making jokes. However, the moment we entered the building, I felt sick almost immediately. My stomach started to roll, but I thought nothing of it and moved on. The guide then began a speech about some people who had died there along with strange things happening. She was halfway through her story when I felt my head start to pound so hard that I grabbed my fiancé's arm because I thought I was going to puke in front of 20 people. She looked at me weirdly and asked if I was okay, but I just couldn't get the words out. I actually felt like I was choking as the air was gone from my lungs. I was able to nod at her though and motioned I was okay because I didn't want to cause a scene. The guide then took us to a different room, but at that point I was holding onto my girl for dear life because my knees were about to give out. The floor beneath my feet was shaking and I started to heave. I'd never felt anything like it. The only way to describe it was like having the flu, just a queasy and sick feeling that wouldn't stop. My ears buzzed and my eyes stung, and I was pretty sure I was about to collapse, when just then, and I swear on my life this is true, I saw what could only be described as a blacked-out figure standing in the corner of the room, just watching our group. It had no face, no eyes, no real body. It was just an inky black figure. I opened my mouth to scream when it just disappeared. Poof, gone. I left the museum so fast and ran outside, thinking surely that everyone thought I was out of my mind. My breath thankfully returned to my lungs, and I gasped when I got outside. The sick feeling was gone too, but my body felt stiff on the way home. I had weird dreams for a while after that, things that would haunt me. It took me a while to get over them, even after we'd gotten home. My fiancé poked fun at me, accusing me of faking it and telling stories. But I will never forget what I saw. I will never forget that sick, overwhelming feeling. Key West is the scariest place I've been in the US, and I'm sticking to it. I strongly believe in the paranormal. I don't find it scary, really. It's more interesting to me than anything. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I moved into a new home with my family, and it seemed straight away to be a bit haunted. One evening, I was getting out of the shower. For some context, my brother's room was at the end of the hall, and the bathroom was on the side, so when you turned towards the end of the hall, as if you were leaving or entering the bathroom, you could see into my brother's room. That night, as I was leaving after my shower, I saw a figure that I assumed to be my brother, standing there. It spoke to me in a similar voice as well, but something was off about it. All the thing said was, "Hello there." I gave him a weird look and just responded with a confused hello back. Then I moved away from the door and headed towards the stairs. When I turned back, it went into the bathroom and shut the door behind itself. And I just thought, okay, whatever, he's weird, and just went downstairs. Now nobody passed me on the stairs, and no one was behind or in front of me. But when I got to the basement to put my clothes in the wash basket, everybody was in the basement, including my brother, who was in the freezer looking for hot dogs, and he hadn't been in his room for quite a while. Later I told my mum about the boy I'd seen, and she told me she had seen the balloon that was in the corner of the dining room getting yanked down as though someone was pulling on it multiple times. She said she was able to communicate to whatever this figure was through the balloon. I don't remember exactly what she'd asked it, but I do remember her telling it that it needed to leave. After that, the balloon didn't move any longer, although that wasn't the end of it. Later that night, I was home by myself, and I was eating my dinner at the dining room table, when I suddenly heard the sound of someone running down the steps, then abruptly stopping. I looked over towards the stairs, but nobody was there. Spooked, I called my mum to ask when she would be home, to which she said soon, so I sat and watched TV until she arrived. On another occasion, when I was home alone, I was again eating at the dining table, when I thought I saw someone running back and forth in front of me in the kitchen. Now, it could have been my eyes playing tricks on me, but it still scared me, so I went and sat outside for a little bit before going back inside and watching TV to distract myself. When I got older, things didn't seem to happen as much, mostly just the sounds of someone following me or tapping me when I was alone. However, a little more recently, I was awoken to the feeling of being yanked out of bed one morning, which freaked me out, especially even after I was fully awake and seeing that there was nothing there, but I was still being pulled out of my bed. For some reason, I didn't scream. I just quickly pulled myself backwards, and whatever had a hold of me finally let go. For a week after that incident, I began having these nightmares of a woman coming out of my closet or the hallway. She would be dirty, pale, dressed in all white, and had long, messy, dark hair. She would come to my bedside and sit down, then put her face as close as she possibly could to mine. I would close my eyes, count to 5, open them, and she would be gone. Then I was able to move again, and I would simply go back to sleep. Eventually, she just stopped showing up. I'm not sure if it was related, or if I was even dreaming, but for more context, the way it started would be me waking up and seeing her standing there or walking towards me, and all I had to do was close my eyes, count to 5, and she would be gone. Another recent thing was when I was outside talking to my mum, and we heard the sound of footsteps and something being dragged above us in the room above the porch, which is my room. We got up and ran to my room, but nothing had been touched and no one was in there at all. My brother was in his room playing a game with his friends online, so it wasn't him either. My mum and I went back downstairs, but continued to hear the sounds. I still hear them sometimes at night, but I just ignore them now. These are experiences from different members of my family and over the span of several years. So a little backstory first. I grew up in a sleepy little village that is also known as the Garden of England, named as such for its picturesque gardens, and on the whole, nothing much ever happened there. Although little does anyone know of the village's dark past, it was a truly dangerous place in the 1600s, where smuggling, murder and crime of all kinds were rife. Things were so bad that the name of the village was changed, and eventually the old reputation along with it. If you saw it now, you'd struggle to believe it could have ever had such a dark past. In the centre of the village is a small cottage, across from it a quaint English pub, and next to that a church. And the old cottage, as you've probably guessed, is where I grew up. Now below the cottage was a large basement that we called the den. It was used by the whole row of houses during the wars as an air raid shelter, as it was below ground, large and secure. Growing up in the house, I remember my parents telling me it was originally used for smuggling. They told me that there were old blocked-up tunnels that ran from the pub and to the church that connected to our house. So this house was already at the centre of some turbulent history already. I had already gone through some pretty weird and haunting happenings living there, even before I'd learnt any of this. From as early as I can remember, I'd had night terrors nearly every night in my little box room right down the narrow hall, and these nightmares were graphic, nothing a small child would make up, and it was the 90s, so parents found it easy to monitor what me and my sisters were watching on TV or reading, etc. We were never allowed to watch scary films. I was also only allowed to read Goosebumps when I was about 12 or 13. But at age 4 to 5, these nightmares were horrific. Half bodies dragging themselves up the stairs and the hallway up to my room, people stealing me from my bed, and shadows creeping from underneath my bed. I also had a gollywog my parents put at the end of my bed. Apologies, and no offence intended. I hated it. It was a gift from someone I can't remember. And it would also visit my dreams, crawling up my bed while I was sleeping and suffocating me. Of course it would have moved when I woke up, but my parents would put this down to me kicking it in my sleep, which is plausible. But despite this, my parents insisted I was being silly and would still place it at the end of my bed. As soon as I hit teenage years, I got rid of it. Although thinking back now, I can't remember how I got rid of it. These were only a few of the horrific nightmares, but it was every night, and I would wake up screaming bloody murder. Looking back, I'm not sure how my parents coped. There was also the hallway leading up to the stairs and then the landing, and any time I had to turn out the light to go up, I would run, almost with my back to the wall. It always felt as if there was something there, right behind me, grasping for an ankle to pull me back down with it. Pretty normal, right? Who hasn't had nightmares or run to their bed a little quicker after turning out the light when they were a kid? The thing was, though, is that my parents, or more my mum, would do it too. I remember my mum telling me when I was older more of the cowardly things she would do. One of which was when my little sister, who was now in my old box room, had a nightmare and she got into the bed with her, comforting her till she fell asleep. She told me that she had to get up and go back to her room though, as she couldn't stand to be in there any longer, as she was that terrified. Not that my parents' room was much better. It was right at the top of the stairs, and my new larger room was next to theirs. From both rooms you could often hear footsteps at night, coming up the stairs and along the hallway. I remember my mother telling me one night that the footsteps came thundering up the stairs right up to her side of the bed. She shuffled over to my dad's side, and when he turned around he asked, "Did you hear that?" Now my dad is a skeptic. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal. But that night, well, he can't explain it to this day. My older sister's room was in the den for a bit, and then I shared rooms with her for a little while whilst my room was being repainted. You'd think down there in the dark basement it would have been the scariest place to be. Even my older sister used to tease that we slept on the same level as the people across the road, i.e. the people buried in the cemetery behind the church. But weirdly enough, it was the rest of the house that turned out to have the most activity. I remember one night my little sister was sleeping in my parents' room, when suddenly she woke up screaming in terror. It was so blood-curdling, all of us ran up the stairs to see if she was okay, scared she was hurt. We got to the room she was in, and she was stood up in bed, still screaming, pointing at the window. Once she'd calmed down, she told us there had been someone stood at the window. And this was one story up. No one could have been standing in the window. But even to this day, she is adamant that there was someone there. My mum also told me one night she woke up to see a figure of a girl in the doorway. Thinking it was one of us, she asked, "Are you okay, darling?" Then it moved behind the door. Puzzled, she got out of bed and moved the door away from the wall, and there was no one there. Eventually, my older sister got a job as a flight attendant, and my parents thought it better to swap rooms with her, so she could leave at all hours easily to catch flights, etc. But looking back, I'm not sure if it was so they didn't have to be in that room any longer. When my sister was away on flights, I'd hear talking and drawers opening and closing from that room. I'd just pull the covers over my head and say to myself I was just hearing things. One night though, when my older sister was at home, she came bursting into my room in hysterics. She told me that she woke up to a girl crying at the side of her bed. Thinking it was our youngest sister, she went to comfort her. But suddenly realizing it wasn't her, she pulled back quickly, and that's when she was grabbed by her ankle and dragged right to the bottom of the bed. Terrified, that's when she ran straight into my room, and that night we slept in the same bed with the lights on. A long time after that, I remember one day looking up from my seat in the front room to see a girl with dark braided hair running through our hallway and up the stairs. I asked my father who it was, and he looked at me confused, telling me no one was there. I went upstairs to where she'd run to, and sure enough, there was no girl there. One time, my sister, my mum and I happened to be talking about our individual experiences. My mum's with the girl standing in the doorway, my sister with the girl next to the bed, and me with the girl running up the stairs, and we realized it was all the same girl we had been seeing. White dress and dark braided hair. Just then a candle from the mantelpiece flew across the room. We were all shocked as there was no way it could have just fallen that way. It was like someone had swiped it off the mantel. For me at least, the girl was one presence in the house, but I believed there was another, darker presence there. The front room doorway at certain times of the day would have a smell of men's body odour. My dad was always meticulously clean, and it would even happen when he wasn't in the house. Then there were different occasions where different people could smell it at different times, with no explanation. Often the dog would also bark at nothing, and doors would open and close by themselves. I would very often and very regularly hear my dad's voice call me when he was at work or not in the house. I would just brush this off as hearing things. However, it was only after moving to a new house years afterwards, and looking back, I realized it wasn't normal. As I grew up and lived in different places, I realized that it proved the cottage was definitely haunted, as we never had experiences like that again. Any other paranormal experiences I've had in my life have never been so negative or imposing. My mum always tried to comfort us by saying people may have died in the house, but many would have been born there too. But I truly believe something terrible happened in that cottage. I worked in the truck stop industry for about 15 years, and all of the following stories took place at the same location. I worked there for less than 18 months. I was given the opportunity to help open this brand new location, and since it came with a fat raise and a promotion, I of course accepted. It has now been about 5 years since the location opened, and I don't believe there is a single one left of the 60+ employees that were there when we opened. On opening day, not long after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a woman delivering flowers dropped the flowers on her sandaled foot and sliced her foot open, bleeding all over the entrance. Within a week of being open, we had water and sewage coming up through all the drains, including sewerage ones outside all over the property, but it hadn't been raining. It wasn't like a flood situation weather-wise, so we have no idea what caused it to suddenly happen. And just as quickly as it happened, it went away. Plumbers were baffled. A couple of months after we opened, we faced a severe storm that destroyed the high-rise interstate sign and caused a 7-hour power outage, so I had sent several people home. I kept a couple of the employees on in case the power came back, and as we sat in the restaurant dining room, chatting under an electric lantern light, one of them mentioned that people were a little worried when they heard this place was going to be built. She was local and had lived in the town all of her life, and had heard rumours that the property was a Native American burial ground for years. I have zero way to prove or disprove if that is accurate, but given the events getting more serious as time went on, it certainly makes you wonder. When the power did come back, despite several steps, I took to unplugging all the equipment to make sure the surge wouldn't fry stuff, as we'd lost several pieces of expensive equipment. Some of this equipment was critical and caused major operational problems for weeks until it could be replaced. The first winter after we opened was the coldest in years, so cold that we had to buy space heaters for the servers in the electrical room so the servers wouldn't freeze up. We had issues with frozen pipes, especially in the truck care centre and the restaurant. Then 6 months after opening was the first death. A truck driver came in to take a shower in one of the shower rooms, and we had sensors on the doors that let us know how long someone had been in there. If the timer had been going for a couple of hours, we would knock on the door to see if maybe they had actually left so we could clean it for the next driver. And when the employee knocked on the door of a shower that had been in use for a couple of hours, there wasn't an answer. She used the key to open the door, and the driver was on the floor. He had died of a stroke. He had been driving a semi-truck 30 minutes before he entered that room. The employee who had opened the door was significantly traumatized. The company did a great job of offering support for her, but she didn't last there much longer after that. A few weeks later was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I was working on the restaurant side of the truck stop as the restaurant manager had quit after a series of bad things happening to her, and they asked me to move into the role temporarily. When one day the assistant manager on the store side came over because the freakiest thing had just happened. She pulled me into the store side office and put on the security camera footage to show me what happened. A small 4-door sedan pulled into the lot, but didn't pull into the gas station side. It pulled into the truck stop side where the semi-trucks went, and the driver parked next to the maintenance shed, which was located adjacent to the main building and very close to a large trash compactor. He proceeded to get out of the vehicle, opened one of the doors and pulled out a trash bag. He threw the trash bag on top of the compactor, then got back in his car and left. I don't remember exactly how long it was as she'd fast-forwarded the footage, but I think it was an hour or two later when he returned. He'd pulled back in next to the compactor, climbed on top of it and chucked the bag onto the roof of the maintenance shed. He then climbed down off the compactor, got in his car and left, never to return. This was when he was noticed by an employee who had been outside gathering trash to take to the compactor. Now the maintenance shed was more of a small building, garage, at about 20 feet by 20 feet. If the employee had not seen him throw it up there, it probably wouldn't have been noticed, maybe even ever, as the building was as high as a 1-story. Once the employee saw the individual leave, he went into the shed to get a ladder and climbed up to get the bag that was on top of the roof of the shed. He then brought the bag inside the store to show the assistant manager. Inside was a ton of paper, documents listing hundreds and thousands of addresses across the United States. Under each address was a specific hidden location on each property where a body could be found. There was no information on who the individuals were, just sex and location. The locations spanned from coast to coast, but I didn't get a chance to look too deeply into them. I was really freaked out though, and I thought that touching them would maybe contaminate something. So we just put what we had pulled out back in the bag, and the obvious answer here was to call the police. So that's what happened next. Now the thing about truck stops is that they are more often than not in remote locations, along interstates for obvious reasons. The town this truck stop is located in has 3 police officers in total. It's a town with less than 1,000 people, so when I say the chief of police showed up, it's because he was the highest ranking officer of 3 in the town. He hated us, as truck stops bring crime, and suddenly he had a lot more work to do. He came in, watched the footage and looked in the bag, and the most frustrating thing here is that he was not concerned in the slightest. He asked what we wanted him to do about it. It was probably a prank, etc. Then he took the items with him, filled out a form for request for the footage and left. My hope here is that he at least forwarded this to the FBI. A couple of weeks after this, there was a body found, who was a bound, nude and recently deceased man across the street at a dump. But because it was a dump, they had no idea where the individual had originated from. Sometime in the following weeks was the second death on the property. It was a driver that had died in his truck. And somewhere in the middle of this, we had another severe storm, and the interstate high-rise was destroyed again. We had another weird incident involving abandoned things, but this one had a resolution. A driver came in to show us what someone had left behind: ratchet straps and a small child's clothing that was folded up neatly next to a diesel pump. The combination of the items was alarming for me, so I got on the camera system and called the police. I was able to find the truck that left the items, and luckily I got the one amazing police officer in the town this time. She actually did her job and followed up with me to let me know that she had found the driver and called him. He had his kid in the truck for a while for summer break, but it had ended, so had brought her home with her mum and wasn't going to see his kid for a while. So when he was cleaning out his truck, he had this clothing and some straps he didn't need and thought someone else could use the items. He didn't think about the combination of the two, raising eyebrows, and he honestly was really grateful that somebody would be worried and followed up in case. A couple of months after the first year mark, the state DOT had to shut down the off-on ramp to the interstate exit as it had started to collapse, and they were worried that the overpass would collapse as well. We had nearly zero business for weeks as construction crews rebuilt the ramps and repaired the overpass. It was during this time that I earned a promotion to a general manager role and was moved to a different location. I kept in touch for a while, especially with my former boss and the assistant manager, and the weird incidences continued. A couple of months after I'd left, there were 2 major incidents, but I cannot remember which came first. One was involving an individual that entered the building aggressively wielding a machete, terrifying everyone, and I wish I hadn't deleted it. But there was footage of state troopers coming in with AKs and drop-kicking the guy. No idea where he'd come from though, as he was on foot, and this location was 10 to 15 miles from the nearest town. The second was a customer who attacked a teenage cashier because he didn't get his lotto ticket correct and got into a brawl with the maintenance guy who came to the kid's defense. Slowly over time I lost touch with them and they both left the location, so I stopped getting the stories. I don't know if they are continuing. Haunted? A portal to hell? I don't know. But what I do know is now I avoid truck stops like the plague. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories in this episode. Please let me know what your views are, and hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, keep being creepy. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories in this episode. Please let me know what your views are.